people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
De la noche, Stephanie Piñeiro.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
And can I ask how you feel about getting stripped by the IBF? You work all that time, you become the undisputed champion, make history.
Fuck the IBF. That's what I say. You know what I mean? Fuck IBF and their organization. I don't give a fuck about, you know what I mean, the IBF. They stripped me damn near 2.5 months after my title, not knowing, you know, what was going to happen next. But it's cool though, you know. I'm not mad at them, you know. I got what I needed, and that was, you know, undisputed. And the rest is history, you know.
Can I ask about the politics here? I appreciate it doesn't seem to bother you that much, but Spence wasn't stripped in all that time. You've been a champion for a little over 3 months and they take the title away from you. It just doesn't smell right, I guess.
Well, you know, it is what it is, you know. They pick and choose who they want to grant certain things to. And if they was going to do something like that, I feel like they should have stripped Spence prior to the fight, given that they knew it was a 2-fight deal going into the fight, you know. So who knows? They knew I couldn't, you know, just get out of my contract with, you know, Spence to fight Boots. So, you know, it is what it is.
I still wonder.
What?
Had it been Errol Spence Jr. that won the fight, would the IBF have been so Johnny on the spot to order a fight between him and Jaron Boots Ennis, to strip him of the IBF title if it had been Errol that won instead of Terrence? Because I notice they don't keep the energy for Errol, or really any PBC fighter, that they keep for any other fighter. Try and understand that Errol Spence Jr. was IBF champion as of what? 2017? What's that? Something like 4 or 5 years? And in those 4 or 5 years, he only ever satisfied one mandatory challenger for them. Just one. Don't bring up the car accident and the injuries he sustained, because injuries didn't stop them from stripping Joe Cordina when he was injured after the Kenichi Ogawa. Joe Cordina was injured in that fight, and they stripped him anyway because he had a mandatory in the queue. They stripped him. But they didn't strip Jermell Charlo, and he's had a mandatory in the queue since 2019. They still haven't stripped Jermell Charlo, even though Bakram Murtazaliev has been waiting in the queue for his title shot since 2019, since before Jermell even became IBF champion. And the IBF aren't taking the stance with Jermell that they just took with Terrence Crawford. Think about it. Think about last year. You know, Jermell was supposed to be fighting Tim Tszyu after the unification match with Brian Castano, but Tim Tszyu, he got injured, and Jermell had the entire rest of the year to take care of business with Bakram Murtazaliev, but was under no pressure from the IBF. And this year, here and now, he goes up to 168, having that mandatory in the queue, and they still don't strip him. He loses the fight with Canelo. Who knows when he's coming back? And still, they haven't stripped him. I think they have, in fact, extended the deadline, the grace period, for Jermell Charlo to come to some kind of agreement with Bakram Murtazaliev as to when they will fight, because so far, there's no new news. They haven't stripped him. It just seems like Jermell and Errol, as IBF champions, got a level of consideration that the IBF doesn't give most fighters and most champions. And what do Jermell and Errol have in common? They're both PBC fighters. That's what they have in common, whereas Terrence, even though Terrence last fought under the PBC banner, he's really not a PBC fighter, and his engagement, his arrangement with Al seems limited to the Errol Spence Jr. fights. How could Errol, have been IBF champion for as long as he was, something like 5 years, having only ever satisfied one mandatory challenger in 5 years, just one. Seems like you guys weren't in a hurry to order him to do anything, and don't talk to me about his injury. The injuries that kept him out of action from late 2019 into late 2020, the injuries that saw him sit out all of 2021 because you didn't give Joe Cordina that same consideration when it came to his injury after the Kenichi Ogawa fight. You stripped him right away.
But you didn't strip Spence, so I wonder, had it been Errol Spence Jr. that won the fight instead of Terrence, would the IBF have been so Johnny on the spot? It's neither here nor there anyway, because we knew ahead of this fight that neither guy was going to stay at welterweight anyway.
In victory or defeat, that neither Errol Spence or Terrence Crawford, irrespective of what would happen in their fight, would stay at welterweight any longer. So you can keep the belt.
If I was him, I'd just tell him, like, I want to fight for it. Like, I'd rather fight the number 3 guy. You know, if I couldn't get the other guys, you know, don't send me a belt in the mail. But it just seemed like, you know, everybody cool with being email champions now and whatnot, just to be called world champion. You know, he got 3 belts. He got like 2 intern belts, and now they're gonna send him another belt, and you know, he's gonna have 3 of the same belts. And it's like, come on, man, you walking around with 3 of the same belts, man. Like,
Said it before and I'll say it again. Jaron Boots Ennis knew. He's not getting a fight with Errol Spence Jr. even though he's fighting in IBF Eliminators. He wasn't expecting to get him in the ring. What he was expecting is that sooner or later the title will go vacant, and he's positioning himself to pick it up. But just picking up a vacant title, that's not going to do anything for your profile. That's not going to do anything for your marquee value. So you can call yourself IBF welterweight champion, and the IBF themselves can make that very easy for you.
It doesn't fool anybody, though. You thought Errol's title was going to go vacant, one way or another. And if nothing else, you knew that this thing between Errol and Terrence, it's a 2-fight engagement. You couldn't have been expecting to get either of them in the ring. So when people accuse Terrence Crawford of ducking Jaron Boots Ennis while he's under contract, and he has to give Errol a rematch, at minimum, he has to sort that out.
You sound fucking stupid. Are you hard of hearing or something? Errol has a rematch clause, and he activated it. Terrence Crawford is not at liberty to fight anyone else until he sorts that out, or until Errol walks away. That's the situation. So where do you get that he's ducking this guy? This guy never thought he was gonna fight him anyway.
You've got a belt now, but no network. No broadcaster to broadcast your fights. How are you gonna become a big name?
Most of the big names, they're gone. You know, Sean Porter retired, Danny moved up, Errol and Terrence, they've got each other. What are you gonna do? And who are you going to fight to become a big name?
He would need to fight often, more often than he has been fighting, at least 3 times a year, at least.
To make his presence felt and his dominance. You put him in there with Rabzov Butaev, you put him in there with a Montes Stanionis, Cody Crowley, whoever's around, whoever you can find, and you make him fight often. In the absence of a big name, what you can do is keep the fighter active. And being honest with you, the last 2 years or so, Boots hasn't been that active.
Not really. He was in many ways a Showtime fighter, but now Showtime is out of boxing beyond this year. And if Showtime is out of boxing, who's gonna bankroll his fights? Where is he gonna fight? Who is he gonna fight?
You can get him a belt, but a belt by itself is not enough. Simply having a belt is not gonna make him a big draw, so he can make the big bucks. You're gonna need more than that. Those eggs are going to need more bacon. The byproduct of being an email champion.
Champions all over the place. It's champions up the wazoo in the sport of boxing. What else have you got besides a belt that was sent to you?
Does that sound harsh? Well, it's a cold world, sweetheart. Wear a helmet.
And a sweater, because there's more work needs doing.
And so, Terrence Crawford is going to be fighting Errol Spence Jr. again, as he has reiterated that the Errol Spence rematch will be his next fight. We signed to do a rematch, and that's what it is. I don't have a date, but I know that's next. It shows the championship mentality that he has, he being Errol Spence Jr. Valiant effort, valiant of him to want to go back in there with Terrence Crawford, having suffered what he suffered at his hands the very first time, but I told you, it's not going to go any different. I know that many are holding out hope that perhaps at 154 he will be stronger than he was at 147, as if it all boils down to the weight at which the contest took place. I told you for years that stylistically, Errol Spence Jr., capable fighter that he might be, he doesn't change much from one fight to the next. All that really changes is who he's fighting. And against Terence Crawford, it simply won't work. He opens up too much, and his punches are too wide. He himself is not accustomed to facing a switch hitter like Terence Crawford, who can fight orthodox and fight southpaw. In the fight with Errol, we saw Terence stick to fighting southpaw, and Errol didn't know what to do about it. The angles.
Errol, who is noticeably slower than Terence Crawford, slower to the punch is wider, his feet are heavier.
So when he goes for a shot and gets countered, he's standing on his whole foot and receives the full brunt of the impact. That forward momentum of his, it doesn't make it any better. Errol Spence Jr. is accustomed to shooting his jab, stepping into it, and bringing other punches over and trying for body attacks and all that good stuff mid-range to inside. But his punches being so much wider than Terence's shots being shorter and more compact.
Errol's forward momentum moving into them, it just makes the damage that much worse.
And the damage that he took in the first fight, there is something to be said about that. Errol Spence Jr. would have been better off getting knocked out, smooth knocked out in the very first round, because then he wouldn't have taken so much punishment. He would have literally been better off getting knocked out and counted out in the first round than taking the systematic beating that he took.
Those holding out hope that at 154 he will be refreshed, renewed, invigorated, and stronger. Need I remind you that if there's any added benefit to fighting at 154, it's a benefit that they both receive. That if Errol is stronger at 154, Terence will be as well. It's not like Terence is coming in at 147 and Errol's coming in at 154. It's a benefit they both receive.
In tandem with the chip that Terence Crawford will have on his shoulder. Ahead of the fight, for many, many years, I told you that Terence Crawford, he's the more cerebral fighter of the two. Having already shared the ring with Errol and knowing his opponent, knowing his quarry, he has all the success from the first fight to build off of, because he knows what works and he knows what doesn't. And he's felt the guy's punch, his power, or the lack thereof, so he goes into a rematch with that chip on his shoulder. I told you many, many times that Crawford is the more adaptable fighter.
I told you that rematches are often won by the fighter who can make the most adjustments, and that's not Errol. That's not the kind of fighter that he is.
He's a good textbook boxer puncher with a decent jab and a decent body attack, but his base style is far too simple. His approach is too easy to read, and he doesn't change very much from one fight to the next. I don't imagine that's going to change in this rematch. If anything, I think Terence might finish him earlier and finish him worse.
And I don't think Errol sticks around much longer after that. I imagine that if he loses the rematch, he retires.
He did say that he's here for a good time, but not a long one. And finally, at the kickoff press conference for the Day of Reckoning megacard set to go down later on this year, His Excellency Turki Al-Sheikh has named Dmitry Bivol versus Artur Beterbiev for the undisputed light heavyweight world titles as one of the fights he wants to see as part of Riyadh's season in Saudi Arabia. Now, for this to happen, Dmitry Bivol, he's got to take care of business against Lyndon Arthur later on this year, and I think he's going to. And Artur, of course, he's got to take care of business against Callum Smith, which I think, comparatively, compared to Bivol's fight, it is a tougher assignment, and that's set to go down early next year. And barring unforeseen circumstances, illness, or injury,
That stuff.
they would presumably try to do the fight in early to mid-March, before Ramadan begins, because Ramadan begins in late March, and Artur Beterbiev is a practicing Muslim, so you've either got to get it done at the beginning of March or after Ramadan is over.
But after Ramadan is over, isn't Riyadh season over?
I think that's the way it breaks down, though I reiterate, Artur Beterbiev is a practicing Muslim, and in all likelihood, he is going to be observing Ramadan. I still favor Dmitry Bivol to win the fight, more so now than before, because that's a tough sequence of fights for a fighter Artur Beterbiev's age. The Callum Smith fight, then the Dimitri Bivol fight immediately afterwards. This would be on Saudi Arabia's dime. They tried to do this thing earlier this year, but could not come to a financial agreement. Most are placing the blame at the feet of Dimitri Bivol when it's both fighters that walked away from the table, not just one.
People like to take sides, that's what I see. To the eye, Artur Beterbiev is a more entertaining fighter to watch to many because he is a knockout merchant. He's got a 100% KO ratio. Every single fighter that he's ever fought in the pro ranks, he's knocked out.
But I don't think any of those fighters that Artur fought, any of those fighters that he knocked out, judge distance quite as well as Dimitri Bivol. This is a game of inches. I don't think they have the movement of Dimitri Bivol, bouncing back and forth, putting punches together as he comes in, then slipping out safely.
He's adaptable like that. He can peck at you, pot shot you from the outside, or he can do to you what he did to Zurdo Ramirez. Step in, putting punches together, flustering you with that forward momentum, then getting out before you can return fire. Dimitri Bivol really is something. The more cerebral fighter of the two.
The fresher, younger fighter of the two. More well-preserved because Dimitri takes less punishment than Artur does, fight by fight. Artur, he's a gunslinger. He's a banger, and he takes shots. He takes some shots, and he is several years older than Dimitri Bivol. Those 38 or 39-year-old legs, are they going to be able to keep up and keep on Dimitri Bivol? And I'd wager
it's going to be hard for him. I think Artur is a special fighter. More than just a pressure guy, more than just a banger.
But he's been injury prone the last couple of years. He's only getting older, and he's only human. His power, that game-changing power, that's not going anywhere. You know, power is the last thing to go, but a fighter's legs, that's the first.
And that's what makes this such a good fight, such a tough fight to call, that even if Artur is injury prone and he's getting older, he's got the kind of single punching power that can instantly change the trajectory of a fight. So Dimitri Bivol, he's got to be on his guard. He's got to be on his P's and Q's. If and when the time comes, he has to fight this fucking monster.
This fight happening, potentially happening, on the Saudis' dime, as opposed to Matchrooms, as opposed to Top Ranks, creates a surplus for them because that's money they don't have to spend in order to bring this fight into fruition, and they can use that money dedicated towards making some other fight, some other big fight.
Since they didn't have to pay for this one, the Saudis would presumably pay for this one. The broadcast partners reap the ratings, reap the benefits of those metrics, and the promoters get to save a few coins.
Out of the annual budget, it works out beautifully. It works out for everyone. And if everything goes to plan, maybe they put this on the undercard of what could be Joshua versus Wilder next year.
Because they're planning on doing that too. Very exciting times in the sport of boxing.